Hello, dear listeners. Welcome to the English Globe, a place where we explore important global topics while helping you improve your English listening skills through thoughtful conversations about world events, history, politics, and international relations. And today we are going to discuss a question that appears frequently in news reports, political debates, and academic discussions around the world, especially when tensions rise in the Middle East. And that question is this: is the United States fighting to protect Israel in the Middle East? Or is its presence in the region connected to broader strategic interests that shape global politics and international stability? Before we begin today's discussion, we would really appreciate your support for this channel, because your engagement helps more learners around the world discover educational English content like this. So if you enjoy thoughtful conversations about global issues while practicing your English listening skills, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the English Globe, and share your thoughts in the comments. And also tell us which country you are listening from, because we always enjoy seeing how our community of listeners connects from many different parts of the world and brings diverse perspectives to these global discussions.
Thank you, Adam. And hello everyone listening to us today, because the topic we are exploring in this episode is not only important for students of international relations or political science, but also for anyone who wants to understand how global alliances work and why powerful countries often make decisions that influence entire regions of the world. And the Middle East is one of the most significant regions in modern geopolitics, since it contains important energy resources, critical trade routes, and several countries whose political relationships have shaped international diplomacy for decades. Which is why discussions about the United States, Israel, and the broader Middle East often become complex and sometimes controversial, requiring careful analysis rather than simple conclusions.
Exactly, Julia, because when people observe news reports about military deployments, diplomatic meetings, or regional conflicts, many begin asking questions about the reasons behind these actions, and one of the most common questions is whether the strong alliance between the United States and Israel means that American military and political involvement in the region is mainly designed to protect Israel's security, or whether the United States is also motivated by broader strategic concerns such as maintaining regional stability, protecting international trade routes, supporting long-standing alliances with multiple countries, and ensuring that economic and security systems connected to the global economy continue functioning smoothly.
And that is precisely why this discussion is important, because international politics is rarely explained by a single reason or a simple answer, as foreign policy decisions are often shaped by a mixture of historical relationships, security partnerships, economic interests, diplomatic commitments, and strategic calculations that evolve over many decades. Which means that when analysts talk about the relationship between the United States and Israel, they often look at a much wider picture that includes regional security dynamics, the global energy market, international alliances, and the role of diplomacy in preventing larger conflicts.
In recent years, this question has become even more visible in global conversations, because the Middle East has experienced several moments of tension and uncertainty that attracted worldwide attention. And whenever regional conflicts escalate or military forces are deployed in strategic areas, observers begin discussing the motivations behind these actions, analyzing whether they are meant to support specific allies, deter potential threats, stabilize key shipping routes, or signal diplomatic commitment to long-standing partnerships that have shaped the region's political landscape for generations.
At the same time, people across different countries often interpret these events in different ways depending on their political perspectives, historical experiences, and national interests, which is why discussions about international alliances can sometimes become very emotional or strongly debated. But here on the English Globe, our goal is not to promote political arguments or take sides in global disputes, but rather to explore the historical background, strategic reasoning, and diplomatic context that help listeners understand why certain relationships exist and how they influence global decision-making in the modern world.
That's an important point, Julia, because understanding international politics requires patience and curiosity, since the relationships between countries are built over many years through agreements, conflicts, negotiations, and cooperation in areas such as security, technology, economics, and diplomacy. And when we look at the connection between the United States and Israel, we are examining one of the most discussed alliances in modern international relations, an alliance that has developed through decades of political partnership, security cooperation, and shared strategic concerns about the stability of the region.
Throughout this episode, we will explore several important dimensions that help explain why this alliance plays such a significant role in global discussions, including the historical origins of the relationship, the strategic interests that influence American foreign policy in the Middle East, the role of military cooperation and defense partnerships, and the broader economic and diplomatic factors that shape how countries interact within this region. Because by understanding these elements together, we can begin to see why analysts often say that global politics is like a complex puzzle where each piece influences the others.
Another important reason this topic deserves attention is that the Middle East occupies a unique position in the world's geographic and economic systems, as the region connects Europe, Asia, and Africa, while also containing some of the world's most important energy resources and maritime trade routes, which means that developments in this region can influence energy markets, global shipping, diplomatic relations between major powers, and even domestic political debates in countries far beyond the Middle East itself.
So during today's discussion, we will carefully examine the central question that inspired this episode, which is whether the United States is primarily acting to protect Israel's security in the region, or whether its actions reflect a broader strategy that includes protecting international trade routes, maintaining long-standing alliances, supporting regional stability, and responding to complex geopolitical challenges that affect the global balance of power. And by looking at history, strategy, economics, and diplomacy together, we can better understand how these factors interact in shaping foreign policy decisions.
And once again, before we move deeper into this discussion, we would love to hear from you, our global community of listeners, who join us from many countries around the world. So please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the English Globe if you enjoy educational conversations like this, and write a comment telling us where you are listening from and what your thoughts are about today's topic, because respectful and thoughtful dialogue between people from different cultures is one of the best ways to build understanding in a world that often feels divided by political disagreements.
Now that we have introduced the central question and explained why it matters in global politics, we can begin exploring the historical foundations of the relationship between the United States and Israel. Because understanding how this alliance developed over time will help us see why it continues to influence strategic decisions and diplomatic conversations across the Middle East today.
When analysts try to understand why the United States and Israel maintain such a close partnership today, they often begin by looking back to one of the most important moments in modern Middle Eastern history, which occurred in 1948, when the State of Israel was officially established following the end of the British Mandate in Palestine, a political transformation that took place after years of international debate, regional tensions, and diplomatic negotiations within the global community. And what makes this moment especially significant for our discussion is that the United States became one of the first countries to recognize Israel as a sovereign state, signaling the beginning of a political relationship that would gradually evolve into one of the most discussed and closely studied alliances in modern international relations.
That early recognition was not just a symbolic gesture, Adam, because it represented the starting point of a diplomatic relationship that would grow more complex over time as both countries navigated the shifting realities of international politics during the 20th century, especially during the early years of the Cold War, when the global political system became divided between competing ideological blocs led by the United States and the Soviet Union. A period in which many regions of the world suddenly gained strategic importance as both superpowers sought partners, alliances, and influence in areas that could shape the balance of power in global affairs.
Exactly, Julia, because when we examine the geopolitical environment of the late 1940s and early 1950s, we see a world that was rapidly reorganizing after the destruction of the Second World War, and in that environment countries were carefully building diplomatic networks that could help them secure stability and influence in an uncertain international system, which meant that relationships between nations were rarely based on a single factor, but rather developed through a combination of political interests, cultural connections, security concerns, and economic opportunities that gradually strengthened ties between governments and institutions over many decades.
During the Cold War, the Middle East became increasingly important in strategic discussions taking place in Washington and other global capitals, because the region was not only located at the crossroads of Europe, Asia, and Africa, but also possessed significant energy resources and vital maritime trade routes that connected major global markets, which meant that stability in the Middle East carried implications far beyond the region itself, encouraging major powers to pay close attention to alliances and diplomatic relationships that might influence the future political direction of this strategically sensitive area.
As these global dynamics unfolded, the relationship between the United States and Israel gradually deepened through diplomatic dialogue and political cooperation, particularly as both countries recognized areas where their interests overlapped in terms of security, technological development, and regional stability. And over time, this connection began to expand beyond simple diplomatic recognition into a broader partnership that included cooperation between government institutions, cultural exchanges, academic collaborations, and growing communication between political leaders who increasingly saw value in maintaining close dialogue on issues affecting the Middle East.
One of the reasons this relationship continued to grow was the development of shared institutional links between the two countries, because partnerships in modern international relations often become stronger when they extend beyond individual leaders and become embedded in government agencies, research institutions, defense organizations, and economic networks that maintain cooperation regardless of political changes within either country. And over the decades, the United States and Israel developed many such connections that reinforced their ability to work together in areas ranging from scientific innovation to diplomatic coordination.
Another important element that shaped the partnership was the gradual expansion of cooperation in defense and security technologies, an area where both countries began exchanging knowledge and developing joint programs designed to strengthen their capabilities in fields such as aviation technology, missile defense research, and cybersecurity systems, collaborations that reflected the increasing importance of advanced technology in modern security planning and allowed both sides to benefit from shared expertise while addressing evolving strategic challenges within a rapidly changing global environment.
Alongside these technological and defense partnerships, economic connections between the two countries also began to grow steadily, as trade agreements, investment partnerships, and innovation-driven industries created new opportunities for collaboration between companies, universities, and research centers that were interested in advancing developments in fields such as agriculture technology, medical research, digital security, and artificial intelligence, areas where both countries have developed strong reputations for innovation and scientific progress that contribute to the broader economic dimension of their relationship.
As these various forms of cooperation expanded, intelligence sharing also became an important part of the partnership, particularly as governments in both countries recognized the value of exchanging information related to regional security developments, emerging technological threats, and geopolitical trends that might influence stability in the Middle East, because in modern international relations, the ability to understand potential challenges before they escalate into crises is often considered a key element of strategic planning and diplomatic coordination.
Over time, the accumulation of these partnerships created what many scholars describe as an institutionalized relationship, meaning that the cooperation between the United States and Israel is now supported by numerous formal agreements, joint programs, policy dialogues, and long-standing diplomatic channels that operate across multiple levels of government and society, making the partnership resilient even during periods when political debates or regional tensions create complex challenges for policymakers in both countries.
What is especially important for listeners to understand is that alliances like this rarely appear suddenly or develop overnight, because international partnerships typically evolve through decades of interaction during which countries test their cooperation in different situations, respond to global changes together, and gradually build trust through shared projects and diplomatic engagement, which is why the U.S.-Israel relationship today reflects the accumulated experiences of many generations of leaders, diplomats, scientists, and strategic planners who have contributed to shaping its current structure.
And this long historical development is precisely why discussions about the alliance often involve more than just contemporary events or recent political decisions, because analysts studying international relations usually examine the deeper historical foundations that influence how governments view their partners and interpret their responsibilities within global alliances, reminding us that foreign policy decisions are often influenced by decades of historical experience rather than only by immediate political circumstances.
So when we return to the central question of today's episode, whether the United States is acting primarily to protect Israel or pursuing broader strategic interests in the Middle East, it becomes clear that understanding the historical roots of the relationship is an essential starting point, because the alliance we observe today has been shaped by a long process of diplomatic recognition, Cold War dynamics, technological cooperation, economic partnerships, and institutional development that together form the foundation of one of the most enduring partnerships in modern geopolitics.
And with that historical background in mind, the next step in our discussion is to examine the wider strategic interests that the United States has in the Middle East as a region. Because while alliances between countries are important, they also exist within broader geopolitical environments where energy resources, global trade routes, and regional stability influence how nations design their long-term foreign policy strategies.
When we try to understand why the United States remains deeply interested in the Middle East, it is important to step back and look at the region from a broader strategic perspective. Because while the relationship between the United States and Israel is certainly a major part of the political conversation, the Middle East itself holds enormous significance in global economics and international security due to its geographic position, its vast energy resources, and the network of transportation routes that connect major continents, which means that decisions made in this region can influence energy markets, shipping systems, and diplomatic relationships across the entire world.
That broader perspective is essential, Adam, because the Middle East has long been known as one of the world's most important centers for energy production, with several countries possessing large reserves of oil and natural gas that play a crucial role in powering industries, transportation systems, and electricity networks in many parts of the world. And since the global economy depends heavily on reliable access to energy supplies, stability in the regions that produce and transport these resources often becomes a priority for governments that want to ensure economic security and prevent disruptions that could affect international markets.
Another factor that increases the strategic importance of the Middle East is its unique geographic location, because the region sits at the intersection of Europe, Asia, and Africa, creating a natural crossroads for trade routes that have been used for centuries by merchants, travelers, and naval forces. And in the modern world, these routes have evolved into highly sophisticated networks of maritime shipping lanes, air transportation corridors, and infrastructure systems that allow goods, energy resources, and manufactured products to move efficiently between continents, making the stability of these pathways extremely important for global commerce.
One of the most frequently discussed examples of such strategic routes is the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow waterway that connects the Persian Gulf with the wider global ocean system, and through which a significant portion of the world's oil shipments passes every day, meaning that any disruption in this area could potentially influence energy prices, shipping schedules, and economic planning in countries far beyond the Middle East, which explains why policymakers and security analysts often pay close attention to developments in this region and consider it an important area for maintaining international stability.
Because of this strategic reality, the United States and other global powers have historically shown interest in ensuring that key maritime routes remain open and secure, as international trade depends heavily on predictable transportation networks where ships carrying energy supplies, manufactured goods, and raw materials can move safely between producers and consumers, and when governments discuss maintaining stability in regions like the Middle East, they are often referring not only to political relationships between states, but also to the protection of these vital systems that support the functioning of the global economy.
Regional stability becomes even more important when we consider how interconnected modern markets have become. Because when energy supplies are interrupted or shipping routes are threatened, financial markets, manufacturing industries, and transportation networks around the world can react quickly to uncertainty, leading to changes in energy prices, adjustments in supply chains, and increased attention from governments seeking to prevent economic disruptions that might affect their domestic economies and international trade relationships.
This broader context helps explain why the United States maintains diplomatic and security partnerships with several countries across the Middle East rather than focusing exclusively on a single ally. Because modern foreign policy often involves building networks of relationships that allow governments to cooperate on issues such as maritime security, counterterrorism, economic development, and technological innovation, all of which contribute to a more stable environment in regions that play a central role in global economic systems.
In fact, if we look carefully at the diplomatic landscape of the Middle East, we can see that the United States works with a variety of partners through military cooperation agreements, economic partnerships, and diplomatic dialogue. And these relationships often involve joint training exercises, investment initiatives, infrastructure projects, and collaborative research programs that aim to strengthen stability and encourage cooperation among countries that share an interest in maintaining peaceful trade and predictable economic conditions.
This approach reflects a broader principle in international relations that supporting allies does not necessarily mean attempting to control an entire region, because alliances are typically based on agreements between sovereign nations that decide to cooperate in areas where their interests overlap, such as defense planning, economic development, or technological innovation, and these partnerships are often structured through formal treaties, joint committees, and diplomatic channels designed to coordinate policy while respecting the independence of each participating country.
Understanding this distinction is extremely important, because discussions about international politics sometimes become simplified into narratives suggesting that powerful countries are attempting to dominate entire regions. While in reality, foreign policy strategies often involve balancing many different objectives, including protecting economic interests, maintaining diplomatic relationships, preventing conflicts from escalating, and working with multiple partners to address challenges that cannot easily be solved by any single nation acting alone.
From that perspective, the presence of the United States in the Middle East can be interpreted as part of a larger strategic effort to maintain stability in a region that plays a crucial role in the global economic system, while also supporting long-standing alliances and responding to security concerns that arise from time to time in an area where political tensions have occasionally created uncertainty for international markets and diplomatic relationships.
And this is why analysts often emphasize that global politics operates through a complex network of interests and partnerships, where countries cooperate with each other in different ways depending on historical relationships, economic needs, and security considerations, which means that understanding the role of the United States in the Middle East requires examining not only its relationship with Israel, but also its broader engagement with regional partners, international institutions, and global economic systems.
So as we continue our conversation today, it becomes clear that the strategic importance of the Middle East extends far beyond any single alliance, because the region's energy resources, geographic location, and trade routes make it a central component of the global system that connects economies, governments, and societies across continents, which is why policymakers and analysts around the world continue to monitor developments there with great attention.
With that broader strategic context in mind, the next step in our discussion is to explore more closely why Israel itself has come to be viewed as one of the United States' most important allies in the region, and how historical cooperation, political values, and security partnerships have contributed to shaping that relationship over many decades.
When experts and policymakers talk about the network of alliances that shape international politics in the Middle East, Israel is very often described as one of the closest and most consistent partners of the United States in the region, a relationship that has developed over many decades through diplomatic cooperation, shared strategic interests, and ongoing communication between political leaders, security institutions, and research communities in both countries, which means that the alliance today is not simply based on a single agreement or moment in history, but instead reflects a long process of cooperation that has gradually strengthened the ties between the two nations.
One reason frequently mentioned by analysts when discussing this partnership is the idea of shared political values, because both the United States and Israel operate with democratic political systems that include regular elections, independent institutions, and active public debate about national policy. And while each country has its own unique political culture and historical experience, the existence of democratic institutions in both societies has often been cited as a factor that encourages political dialogue and cooperation between leaders who see value in maintaining stable relationships with governments that share similar governing frameworks.
Alongside these political similarities, another element that has strengthened the relationship is cooperation in technology and scientific research, areas where both countries have developed strong reputations for innovation and advanced development, particularly in fields such as cybersecurity, agricultural technology, medical research, and digital systems that support modern economies, and over time, partnerships between universities, research centers, and technology companies have created opportunities for collaboration that extend beyond government policy and into the broader economic and scientific communities of both nations.
This technological cooperation has also played a role in the development of defense systems and security technologies, because modern national defense increasingly depends on sophisticated equipment and digital capabilities that require extensive research and engineering expertise, and through joint projects and collaborative programs, both countries have been able to share knowledge, test new systems, and develop innovations that contribute to the security infrastructure supporting their respective defense strategies.
In addition to technological collaboration, military cooperation has been another important part of the partnership, particularly through joint training exercises and strategic coordination designed to improve communication and operational understanding between defense forces, activities that allow military personnel from both countries to exchange knowledge about logistics, planning, and crisis response, while strengthening the ability of allied forces to work together effectively when addressing security challenges in complex environments.
Intelligence cooperation also plays a significant role in modern alliances, because governments often rely on information sharing to better understand emerging threats, regional developments, and technological risks that could affect national security or international stability. And by exchanging intelligence assessments and analytical insights, allied countries can often respond more effectively to potential challenges while improving their ability to anticipate developments that might influence political or security conditions in sensitive regions.
Another important factor that strengthens alliances is the concept of long-term trust between partners, because relationships between countries usually develop through years of consistent cooperation, during which leaders demonstrate reliability, communicate openly about shared concerns, and support each other during moments of uncertainty. And over time, these experiences build a foundation of confidence that encourages governments to continue working together when new challenges arise.
Shared security concerns can also influence how alliances develop, particularly in regions where political tensions or historical conflicts have created complex security environments. Because when countries face similar challenges, they often find it beneficial to coordinate their policies, exchange information, and support each other diplomatically in international forums, which helps them manage risks while maintaining stability within their broader strategic environment.
This cooperation often extends beyond security planning and into diplomatic coordination as well, since allied nations frequently consult with each other when responding to regional crises or participating in international negotiations, allowing them to share perspectives and develop policy approaches that reflect their common interests, while also considering the broader political dynamics that influence regional stability and global diplomacy.
During moments of heightened tension in the Middle East, these alliances can play an especially important role because governments must often make rapid decisions about diplomacy, humanitarian assistance, and regional security policies, and having established partnerships with trusted allies can help leaders communicate more effectively, coordinate responses, and seek solutions that reduce the risk of escalation while protecting their national interests.
It is also important to remember that alliances in international relations are rarely static or unchanging, because they evolve as new technologies emerge, political environments shift, and global challenges require different forms of cooperation, which means that the relationship between the United States and Israel continues to develop through ongoing dialogue, research partnerships, economic exchange, and security collaboration that adapt to changing circumstances over time.
For scholars and students studying international relations, the US-Israel partnership often serves as an example of how alliances can become deeply institutionalized through multiple layers of cooperation involving governments, academic institutions, technology industries, and diplomatic networks that together form a complex system of interaction that extends far beyond individual political leaders or short-term policy decisions.
Understanding these different dimensions helps explain why Israel is frequently described as a key ally of the United States in the Middle East, because the relationship is supported not only by shared strategic interests, but also by decades of collaboration in political dialogue, economic partnerships, technological innovation, and security coordination that have gradually strengthened the bond between the two countries.
And as we continue our exploration of this topic, the next important question to examine is how the United States maintains its broader military presence across the Middle East, including naval deployments, regional bases, and cooperative security arrangements that are often discussed when analysts try to understand the practical role of American forces in maintaining stability and responding to challenges in this strategically important part of the world.
When people hear news about the United States military operating in the Middle East, they often imagine active battlefields or ongoing wars. But the reality is usually more complex than that simple picture, because the American military presence in the region includes a network of air bases, naval deployments, logistical centers, and cooperative security facilities that support a wide range of activities. And many analysts explain that these forces are designed not only for combat situations, but also for deterrence, regional stability, and rapid response capabilities that allow governments to react quickly if a crisis suddenly threatens international shipping routes, allied countries, or humanitarian conditions.
I completely agree with that explanation, Adam, because when we examine how modern military strategies work, we often see that the presence of forces is intended to prevent conflicts rather than to start them, which is why the concept of deterrence is so frequently discussed by security experts. Since the idea behind deterrence is that the visible presence of capable military units can discourage escalation or aggressive actions by signaling that the international community is prepared to respond if stability is threatened.
Exactly, Julia. And this is one of the main reasons the United States maintains several military facilities across the Middle East, including air bases used for reconnaissance missions, training operations, and logistical coordination, as well as naval installations that support ships operating in nearby waters, because these facilities allow military planners to monitor developments in the region, cooperate with partner nations, and maintain the ability to respond quickly if diplomatic or humanitarian situations require support.
And when we look at the maritime dimension of this presence, the role of naval forces becomes particularly interesting, because the United States Navy frequently deploys carrier strike groups and other vessels to strategic waterways that connect the Middle East to global trade routes, meaning that these ships often serve as mobile platforms capable of conducting surveillance, supporting humanitarian missions, and cooperating with allied navies in exercises designed to strengthen coordination and communication during emergencies.
Aircraft carriers are especially notable in this context because they function almost like floating air bases that can operate far from the territory of the country that owns them, carrying dozens of aircraft along with advanced radar systems, communication technology, and defensive equipment that allow them to support a wide range of missions. And when these vessels operate in international waters, they often participate in joint training activities with allied forces, demonstrating the type of cooperation that characterizes many modern security partnerships.
Yes, and I think it is important for listeners to understand that these deployments are often carefully planned in coordination with regional partners, because many Middle Eastern countries maintain security relationships with the United States that involve joint training exercises, defense planning discussions, and collaborative programs designed to strengthen each country's ability to respond to emergencies such as natural disasters, maritime security threats, or unexpected political crises that require rapid coordination between governments.
Another element frequently mentioned by analysts is the presence of missile defense systems and early warning technologies that help detect potential threats before they escalate into serious dangers, because modern defense strategies increasingly rely on advanced sensors, radar networks, and communication systems capable of identifying incoming risks and allowing decision-makers to respond quickly, which can help prevent misunderstandings or accidents from turning into larger conflicts.
I agree with that point as well, Adam, because these defensive systems are often designed to protect civilian populations, strategic infrastructure, and international transportation networks that are essential for the global economy. And by working together on these technologies, allied countries can strengthen their ability to maintain stability in regions where political tensions sometimes create uncertainty about future developments.
In addition to security planning, the U.S. military presence also supports humanitarian and logistical missions that are sometimes overlooked in public discussions about defense policy, because military aircraft, ships, and engineering units are frequently used to deliver emergency aid, evacuate civilians during crises, and assist international organizations responding to natural disasters or humanitarian emergencies that occur in areas where local resources may be limited.
That humanitarian dimension is often less visible than military exercises or security deployments, but it is an important reminder that armed forces in many countries are trained not only for combat operations, but also for disaster response, infrastructure repair, and emergency transportation missions that can provide immediate assistance when unexpected events threaten communities or disrupt normal economic and social activity.
Another reason governments maintain a military presence in strategic regions is to ensure the safety of international trade routes, because global commerce depends heavily on ships transporting goods such as energy resources, agricultural products, electronics, and medical supplies between continents, and naval patrols or coordinated maritime security operations can help discourage piracy, protect commercial shipping lanes, and maintain confidence in the transportation systems that support the world economy.
And this brings us back to a very important point that we both seem to agree on, which is that the presence of military forces does not automatically mean that active warfare is taking place, because in many cases the goal of such deployments is precisely the opposite: to maintain stability, reassure allies, and prevent situations from escalating into open conflict by demonstrating that governments are prepared to defend key international systems if necessary.
That distinction is crucial when discussing the role of the United States in the Middle East, because public conversations sometimes assume that every deployment signals the beginning of military action, while in reality, many operations are focused on monitoring developments, conducting training exercises, coordinating with regional partners, and maintaining the logistical capabilities required to respond quickly if an unexpected situation demands attention.
So when observers see aircraft carriers, air bases, or defense systems operating in the region, it is helpful to remember that these elements are part of a broader security architecture designed to support alliances, protect trade routes, respond to emergencies, and maintain stability in an area that remains extremely important for global economic and political systems.
Understanding this broader purpose helps us see why military presence can be interpreted in different ways depending on the perspective of the observer. But many analysts emphasize that the primary objective is often to prevent instability rather than to initiate conflict, which highlights how complex and carefully balanced modern security strategies have become in an interconnected world.
And with that understanding of how military deployments function within broader strategic planning, we can now move forward in our discussion to explore how different countries in the region interpret the United States' role in the Middle East, because perspectives about alliances and security policies often vary depending on historical experiences, political interests, and national priorities.
When we examine how the Middle East views the United States' support for Israel, it becomes clear that opinions vary widely across the region. Because while some governments and political leaders appreciate the stability provided by U.S. involvement, others perceive it as biased or favoring certain countries over others, and this difference in perspective often depends on historical experiences, regional conflicts, and long-standing political alliances that have developed over decades, meaning that the same action, such as military support, diplomatic backing, or economic aid, can be interpreted very differently depending on the country, the government in power, or even the specific communities within that nation.
Exactly, Adam. And this variation is evident when we look at the countries that cooperate closely with the United States, such as some Gulf states, which engage in joint military exercises, intelligence sharing, and diplomatic collaboration, while at the same time, other countries, sometimes including nations that have had historical conflicts with Israel, criticize U.S. policies, argue for a more balanced approach in international forums, and express concerns about the potential consequences of perceived favoritism. Because public opinion in these countries is often shaped not only by government statements, but also by cultural, historical, and social narratives that influence how people view foreign interventions and alliances.
That is a key point, Julia, because in addition to bilateral relationships, there are also ongoing debates in international organizations, such as the United Nations, where countries discuss resolutions related to conflicts, humanitarian assistance, and diplomatic recognition. And in these forums, the role of the United States as a strong supporter of Israel often becomes a point of contention, highlighting how decisions by a single country can have ripple effects across the global political system and how regional perspectives shape broader discussions about peace, stability, and international law.
Historical conflicts play a significant role as well, because public opinion in the Middle East has been shaped by decades of wars, territorial disputes, and periods of tension between Israel and its neighbors. And these experiences influence how ordinary citizens, political analysts, and government officials interpret U.S. actions, whether in terms of military assistance, economic aid, or diplomatic support, which is why understanding historical context is crucial for anyone trying to analyze current events, since past experiences often determine whether a country views a foreign ally as a stabilizing force or as a party whose policies might exacerbate regional tensions.
It is also important to recognize that regional perspectives are rarely uniform within a single country, because political parties, religious groups, and civil society organizations may hold different opinions about the United States and its role in the Middle East, creating a complex tapestry of viewpoints that challenges simple explanations. And this diversity means that analysts, diplomats, and educators must pay attention to multiple sources, historical narratives, and social dynamics in order to understand how U.S. support for Israel is perceived across the region.
Exactly, Adam. And this complexity is why we always encourage our listeners to approach geopolitics with an open mind. Because understanding international relations requires recognizing that countries often make decisions based on a mixture of strategic interests, historical experiences, and domestic considerations, which means that the same policy can be supported by one group, criticized by another, and debated in international forums, all at the same time.
Another example of this complexity can be seen in diplomatic negotiations, where countries with differing views on U.S.-Israel relations must still engage in dialogue to achieve compromises on issues such as regional security, trade agreements, and humanitarian assistance, and these negotiations often highlight how practical concerns, such as maintaining stability or ensuring economic cooperation, can sometimes outweigh ideological disagreements, creating space for collaboration even among countries with conflicting perspectives.
Public opinion in the Middle East is also influenced by media coverage, educational narratives, and historical memory, meaning that events from decades ago, such as wars, peace treaties, or diplomatic interventions, continue to shape how citizens perceive foreign involvement today, and these perceptions can affect everything from voting patterns and political activism to the way governments respond to international crises, making it clear that regional views on U.S. support for Israel are deeply interconnected with historical and social contexts.
So when we talk about U.S. support for Israel, it is essential to understand that it is not universally praised or criticized, but rather interpreted through multiple lenses that reflect both political calculations and social experiences. And this diversity of opinion makes the Middle East a complex and dynamic environment where alliances, rivalries, and historical legacies all interact to shape contemporary perceptions of foreign policy actions.
And for our listeners, this is a key lesson. Geopolitics is rarely a simple story of good versus bad, or allies versus adversaries, because each country has its own history, interests, and priorities that influence how it reacts to international events. And understanding this multiplicity of perspectives is essential not only for analyzing current events, but also for becoming more informed global citizens who can think critically about the world while continuing to improve their English through educational content like this.
Exactly, Julia. And as we move forward in our discussion, the next step will be to explore how diplomacy and peace agreements in the region have been influenced by these diverse perspectives, because understanding the diplomatic tools that countries use to negotiate, cooperate, and sometimes resolve conflicts is essential for seeing how U.S. support for Israel fits into a larger pattern of regional strategy, negotiation, and alliance building. When we look at the U.S. role in the Middle East, it is important to remember that military presence is only one part of a much broader strategy, because diplomacy has historically been a central tool used to manage conflicts, build alliances, and create pathways toward peace. And over the decades, the United States has often acted as a mediator in numerous peace processes that have aimed to resolve long-standing disputes between Israel and its neighbors, including high-profile negotiations that brought attention from international organizations, world leaders, and policymakers seeking ways to reduce tensions in one of the most complex regions in the world.
Absolutely, Adam. And this is where diplomatic negotiations and regional agreements play a critical role, because military strategies can only go so far without accompanying political dialogue. And agreements that address territorial disputes, economic cooperation, and mutual security concerns are often essential to creating stability that benefits not only the countries directly involved, but also the wider international community, as preventing conflict and fostering dialogue can help maintain predictable trade routes, energy supplies, and overall regional security.
One important example of this diplomatic approach can be seen in the normalization agreements that have emerged in recent years, which have changed the landscape of regional alliances by bringing countries into closer cooperation with Israel and the United States on a range of issues, from security collaboration to economic development. And these agreements demonstrate how diplomacy can reshape relationships, as states that were previously distant or in tension can find common ground through negotiated frameworks that promote mutual interests while reducing friction in areas that were historically sources of conflict.
And Adam, what is interesting about these negotiations is that they often require careful balancing of interests, because diplomats must consider historical grievances, domestic political pressures, and international expectations while trying to find agreements that are acceptable to all parties. And this process often highlights how complex and nuanced diplomacy really is, since agreements are rarely simple solutions and require detailed planning, compromise, and continued dialogue to be successful over time.
Exactly, Julia. And one reason these agreements are so significant is that they do more than just reduce immediate conflict. They also build long-term frameworks for cooperation, which can include intelligence sharing, joint economic projects, cultural exchanges, and coordinated approaches to security threats. And this demonstrates how diplomacy can create lasting structures that go beyond temporary ceasefires or political declarations, influencing the way countries interact in multiple sectors for decades.
Another aspect worth noting is that diplomatic initiatives often serve as signals to other countries in the region, because successful negotiations can encourage neighboring states to consider dialogue as an alternative to conflict, showing that cooperative solutions are possible, and in this way, diplomacy can have a ripple effect that encourages broader stability and the development of regional partnerships that might not have been feasible without sustained negotiation and international support.
It's also important to recognize that U.S. involvement in these peace processes often reflects a combination of strategic and humanitarian interests, because the country seeks not only to support its allies, such as Israel, but also to maintain regional stability, ensure the free flow of trade and energy resources, and contribute to global security by reducing the likelihood of large-scale conflicts that could involve multiple nations and impact international markets.
Yes, Adam, and this dual purpose, supporting allies while promoting regional stability, shows why diplomacy is as important as any military strategy. Because without dialogue, agreements, and negotiated frameworks, conflicts are more likely to escalate. Alliances can become fragile, and opportunities for cooperation in trade, technology, and energy sectors may be lost, which in turn can have consequences far beyond the Middle East itself.
Furthermore, peace agreements often require sustained attention over time, because initial agreements may need follow-up measures, monitoring mechanisms, and continued political engagement to ensure that all parties uphold their commitments, demonstrating that successful diplomacy is rarely about a single event, but rather about ongoing negotiation, relationship building, and conflict management that adapts to changing circumstances.
And this continuous effort is what makes diplomacy in the Middle East both challenging and essential, because historical conflicts, shifting political dynamics, and complex social factors mean that relationships between countries are constantly evolving, and only through sustained dialogue and strategic negotiation can nations hope to create stable, cooperative frameworks that reduce conflict and encourage long-term collaboration.
So, Julia, when we consider U.S. support for Israel alongside these diplomatic efforts, we can see that the American role is not limited to backing a single ally militarily. It also involves active engagement in negotiation, mediation, and alliance building that seeks to reduce tensions, create stability, and support multilateral agreements that benefit the region as a whole.
Exactly, Adam. And the key lesson here for our listeners is that diplomacy and peace agreements are essential tools in modern international relations because they allow countries to manage disagreements, foster collaboration, and reshape regional relationships in ways that can reduce conflict while creating opportunities for economic, technological, and social cooperation across the Middle East.
With that understanding of diplomacy and regional agreements, the next section of our discussion will focus on the economic and energy dimensions of U.S. involvement in the Middle East, because economic interests often intersect with strategic alliances and influence how countries prioritize stability, trade, and access to key resources like oil and gas. When we discuss the U.S.-Israel relationship, it is important to recognize that it extends far beyond military cooperation and strategic defense planning, because economic and technological collaboration has become a central component of the partnership, allowing both countries to benefit from shared innovation, research initiatives, and business ventures, and demonstrating that alliances are not only about security, but also about creating mutually beneficial opportunities that strengthen long-term relationships through commerce, knowledge exchange, and joint development projects across multiple sectors of society.
Absolutely, Adam. And one of the most visible aspects of this collaboration is the thriving technology partnership between the two countries, which includes joint research programs, university partnerships, and cooperation between private companies focused on advanced innovation. Because both nations have strong capabilities in areas such as cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, data analysis, and software development, allowing them to address complex technological challenges together while fostering a culture of innovation that benefits not only the two countries, but also global technological advancement.
Another area where cooperation is particularly strong is in agriculture technology, because Israel has developed advanced systems for irrigation, water conservation, and crop management that are highly adaptable to challenging environmental conditions. And by sharing these technologies and expertise with U.S. researchers and businesses, both countries are able to improve food security, optimize resource management, and develop solutions that can be applied not only in the Middle East, but also in regions facing similar environmental challenges around the world.
Medical research is also a major area of collaboration, Adam, because both countries have invested heavily in biomedical innovation, vaccine development, and healthcare technologies, with researchers frequently exchanging data, conducting joint clinical trials, and exploring novel treatment methods, which strengthens the partnership while addressing some of the most urgent public health challenges, and shows that economic and technological cooperation can have tangible benefits for millions of people far beyond the borders of the countries directly involved.
Trade relations further reinforce this alliance because U.S.-Israel trade agreements allow both nations to exchange goods, services, and intellectual property efficiently, fostering economic growth, supporting innovation, and providing opportunities for startups and established companies alike to access international markets. And this economic integration helps solidify the partnership by creating shared interests that go beyond short-term political considerations and focus on long-term prosperity and mutual benefit.
The impact of economic cooperation is not limited to specific industries, Adam, because the partnership also supports technological entrepreneurship, investment in research and development, and the creation of high-skilled jobs, which encourages a generation of innovators and professionals who are trained to collaborate internationally, share ideas, and contribute to projects that strengthen the economic and technological resilience of both nations, further deepening the bond between them.
Intellectual property and innovation exchanges also play a key role in shaping the alliance, because shared research initiatives and collaborative development projects encourage both countries to leverage their unique strengths, from cutting-edge laboratory research in the United States to Israel's high-tech startup ecosystem. And these combined efforts accelerate advancements in sectors that are increasingly important to global competitiveness, such as renewable energy, autonomous systems, and cybersecurity infrastructure.
Another important aspect is that economic and technological cooperation creates a network of interdependencies that naturally reinforces diplomatic and strategic relationships, because when countries benefit from each other's innovations, trade, and research contributions, they are more likely to maintain stable, constructive relations, seek peaceful resolution of conflicts, and support each other in international forums, which shows that non-military collaboration is a critical factor in sustaining long-term alliances.
This form of cooperation also demonstrates that alliances can be multidimensional, because while military partnerships receive significant public attention, economic, technological, and research-based collaboration can be just as important in creating trust, demonstrating mutual commitment, and building resilience against both political and economic challenges, which ultimately helps maintain a stable environment where both countries can pursue growth, innovation, and security objectives simultaneously.
In summary, Adam, the US-Israel relationship is strengthened by robust economic and technological ties that complement military cooperation, because by working together in technology, research, trade, agriculture, and healthcare, both countries create long-term benefits that reinforce strategic alliances, foster innovation, and demonstrate that international partnerships can thrive through shared interests, intellectual exchange, and collaborative problem-solving far beyond the battlefield or traditional diplomatic negotiations.
When we examine the global perspective on the US-Israel relationship, it quickly becomes clear that this topic is widely debated among analysts, political leaders, and international commentators, because while some see American support for Israel as a natural extension of strategic alliances and shared democratic values, others interpret it as an effort to maintain influence in a region that is critical for global energy markets, trade routes, and security considerations. And these differing interpretations often shape not only diplomatic discussions, but also media coverage, academic analysis, and public opinion around the world.
Exactly, Adam. And the variety of interpretations is striking because some governments and analysts emphasize the protective aspect of the relationship, suggesting that US support ensures the security of a long-standing ally in a historically volatile region, while others argue that it reflects broader strategic calculations designed to maintain geopolitical influence, project power, and secure economic and energy interests, which shows that international politics is rarely a simple story and instead involves multiple layers of reasoning, historical context, and competing priorities that observers must understand to make sense of global events.
Global powers in particular pay very close attention to developments in the Middle East, because the region's stability or instability can have ripple effects that reach far beyond local borders, influencing oil prices, trade networks, migration patterns, and diplomatic alignments, and as a result, countries such as Russia, China, and European nations closely monitor U.S. military and diplomatic activity, evaluate the potential consequences for their own interests, and adjust their foreign policies accordingly, which often contributes to a complex web of international reactions and counter-reactions.
This complexity is heightened by the fact that competing narratives exist about the role of external actors in regional conflicts. Adam, because while some international observers focus on security and alliance building, others highlight issues of sovereignty, humanitarian concerns, and historical grievances, creating a landscape where different countries, organizations, and media outlets present contrasting interpretations of the same events. And this can sometimes make it challenging for the public to separate facts from opinion or understand the full context behind international decisions.
Indeed, Julia, and these debates are often visible in forums such as the United Nations, where resolutions, statements, and votes reflect differing perspectives on the Middle East and U.S. involvement, demonstrating that even when agreements are reached or policies are implemented, there is rarely universal consensus, and international politics continues to be shaped by discussion, negotiation, and sometimes disagreement among multiple actors with diverse objectives.
Another key point is that public opinion around the world can be influenced by media narratives, political rhetoric, and historical experience, meaning that the perception of US support for Israel may vary widely depending on the country, region, or even demographic group. And understanding these differences requires careful attention to context, sources, and the broader geopolitical framework, because news alone may not fully capture the complexity of international relations or the reasons behind policy decisions.
As we bring our discussion to a close, it is important to reflect on the key lessons that we've explored today, because the relationship between the United States and Israel is far more than just headlines or political talking points, and understanding its historical, strategic, and diplomatic dimensions helps provide context for the broader Middle East dynamics. First, this alliance has deep historical roots, beginning shortly after the creation of Israel in 1948 and strengthened over decades through political dialogue, economic cooperation, and military collaboration, showing how long-term partnerships are built gradually and reinforced by shared values, experiences, and mutual trust.
That's right, Adam. And in addition to its historical foundation, the US-Israel relationship is shaped by strategic interests that extend beyond the bilateral alliance, because the Middle East is one of the most geopolitically important regions in the world, containing key energy resources, strategic trade routes, and a complex network of regional relationships. And this means that US foreign policy decisions often reflect broader considerations, including regional stability, global economic security, and maintaining alliances with multiple countries, rather than a singular focus on one nation alone.
Another lesson we discussed is the role of the U.S. military presence in the region, which is often misunderstood, because many people assume that the presence of bases, aircraft carriers, and missile defense systems automatically implies active warfare, while in reality, these forces are frequently deployed for deterrence, rapid response, and alliance commitments, helping ensure that conflicts do not escalate and that regional partners feel supported in moments of tension, which highlights the multifaceted nature of modern security strategies.
Exactly, Adam. And this brings us to the broader principle that international politics is complex and rarely explained by a single reason or perspective, because public opinion, historical grievances, strategic priorities, and economic considerations all interact to shape the decisions of governments, and countries may interpret the same actions in very different ways depending on their own experiences, alliances, and domestic priorities, which is why careful analysis and critical thinking are essential for anyone seeking to understand global events.
We also explored how economic and technological cooperation strengthens alliances, because partnerships in trade, research, cybersecurity, agriculture, and medical innovation create shared interests that extend far beyond military considerations, and this type of collaboration fosters trust, mutual benefit, and long-term stability, reinforcing the broader strategic partnership while demonstrating that modern alliances are multidimensional, combining security, economy, diplomacy, and science in ways that make cooperation both practical and sustainable.
In addition, we examined how diplomacy and peace agreements play a critical role in shaping regional relationships, because negotiated frameworks, normalization agreements, and joint initiatives allow countries to manage conflicts, build trust, and explore new avenues for collaboration. And these diplomatic efforts show that alliances are not only about power projection, but also about communication, compromise, and mutual recognition of interests, which can reduce tension and encourage constructive engagement across the Middle East.
It's also important to remember the value of understanding regional perspectives and global reactions, because countries and populations across the Middle East and around the world interpret U.S. support for Israel differently based on historical experience, political priorities, and social context. And by considering these multiple viewpoints, we can gain a more nuanced understanding of international relations, avoid oversimplified conclusions, and appreciate the complex dynamics that influence decisions in global politics.
And for our listeners, this complexity is a reminder that following global events calmly and critically is essential, because reacting to news without context or without understanding competing narratives can lead to misunderstandings or biased interpretations, while thoughtful observation and analysis help build informed perspectives that consider multiple dimensions of each situation, which is a valuable skill for anyone interested in international affairs.
Finally, we want to emphasize that understanding alliances, strategic interests, and global strategy is not only important for analyzing world events, but also for becoming more informed global citizens, because knowledge of history, diplomacy, and international relations allows individuals to engage with news critically, form educated opinions, and participate in discussions about the world in a meaningful way, while also improving their English listening and comprehension skills through careful exposure to educational content like this.
Exactly, Adam. And we hope that today's discussion has helped our listeners see how history, strategy, diplomacy, economics, and technology all interact to shape the US-Israel relationship and the wider Middle East, and that it encourages everyone to follow global news thoughtfully, consider multiple perspectives, and continue developing their English skills in an engaging, educational, and informed way, because understanding the world is a continuous journey that benefits both knowledge and personal growth.